I want to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Mr. Johnson, will you take roll? And just so so everyone notices, we're having trouble with the screens. So we have paper agendas and we'll try to follow along. So, Mr. Johnson.
Councilman Fugit?
Here.
Councilman Helsley? Dr. Lyons?
Here.
Councilman Parker?
Here.
Former Vice Mayor Pappas?
Here.
Former Vice Mayor Saunders?
Here.
Vice Mayor Smith? Here. All members present.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Y'all received the minutes. Is any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Mr. Johnson, did anyone sign up for public forum?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Reports of officer or subcommittees. We don't have any of those because we have not divided ourselves into subcommittees or have any officers. So, and then, well, other than me, I guess I am the one officer. And then special committees, any reports of special committees? We don't have any of those yet. And then no special orders and no unfinished business. So we will move to new business, but before we move into new business, I would like Dr. Lyons to, as this is a little bit of unfinished business, as we talked at our last meeting, we might get some help from the Baker Center with any research that we might need. And Dr. Lyons, I believe we have a couple of people that can work with us.
Yes. Thank you. We actually have an embarrassment of riches. We got two people. We have Julia Dieter, who is the intern. He's an undergraduate at the Baker School. And we have Dane Morgan, who's in the Masters of Public Policy and Administration, both of whom are willing and able to do some research for the task force as needed or requested.
Great, thank you. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Glad you find this interesting and want to help us, because I feel confident as we move through this, there'll be some things that we want to know more about. Are we there?
We're getting there.
Okay.
Apologies.
I will just say I was having technical difficulties of my own getting my new computer set up, so I barely made it here 3 minutes early, so I'm just glad to see somebody else is having a little issue. So I'll just go ahead and talk while Will clicks, just to remind us that what we were what our assignment was between meetings were to take a look at the current city council rules that are under, let me see, section, it's Article 2, Rules of Procedure, is where the, in Chapter 7.5 of the city ordinances. And ask y'all to take a look and see what sections you found we should spend some time on. I believe some people sent things into Will ahead of time. Some people may have looked some more and thought of additional things. But I'd like for us to start maybe with what sections or particular items you thought you wanted to discuss further. Not prepared to talk about the exact changes you want to make right now, but what are the areas of our rules that we think we need to spend some time taking a look at. So, Dr. Lyons, you have your, Ms. Parker has her light on too.
Well,
I was about to say, was yours left over? So, Ms. Parker, would you like to start?
Well, and I can share the rules that I've identified. I was just curious if we have any suggestions that have been made to the committee.
Yes, we have a few council members that
Okay,
sent
cool.
in former some people on this body sent in things that they wanted to look at. I'm not sure that any other council people sent in anything.
One current member
Okay.
of council who doesn't serve on the task force submitted.
Okay, so I asked council members too, so we've heard from a council member, some people on this committee, and then I thought we could go ahead and start then with those sections. And then I have also asked Mr. Johnson to take a look at areas that he thinks we should look at if they're not mentioned by other council members, of things that maybe over time, council custom may not totally align with what is written in the rules, so, because that happens over time.
Thank you for that. The rules I highlighted were Rule 2, Rule 3, Rule 7, Rule 13.
Whoa, I'm checking. Got Rule 2, Rule 3, what? Rule 7. I wasn't going fast enough.
13 and 18.
13.
And some of them are, it's the same change that I'm
Right.
recommending. It just affects multiple rules.
I think you also had indicated Rule 9 and Rule 25.
Well, I don't have those in my notes. Those were in my
Through
updated notes
Rule
that I sent
18.
you.
And what for the other two?
9 and 25.
Yeah.
I'll look back at my email.
9 and
And those may have been, you may not have had cited a rule number, but I knew where those might be.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Smith.
Yeah, I had 3, and one was a spelling fix. So the first one is 2-9. I'm not necessarily sure if this is the place it should go, but it's about proposed ordinances on second reading.
Okay.
So,
That's actually within
That's within
rule
section
number
2.
2.
yeah, I'm just going to kind of say them for the
Oh.
record, and also add a little bit more detail on what number exactly within rule.
Okay, within the rule you're
Yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
interested in?
Yep.
Okay.
The next one was Rule 13C, which is this agenda shall show as to planning and zoning matters where the action is proposed or not recommended by MPC or its staff.
Okay.
So this is about whether planning staff recommends approval or denial of a matter.
Okay.
And then the last substantive one is Rule 18B. And I'll save the detail for later, but this is about public
Yeah, public forum.
procedures, yeah.
Okay.
And then I just, in Rule 5, so the last thing is Rule 15, which is related to voting. I think therefore is misspelled. I don't know if it's that way in the.
Oh, yeah.
I checked, therefore without an E is it's a legal use of the word.
All right.
And it may be intended for it to not have an E.
Okay.
Or archaic, yes, it may be either one.
Put your mic on, say that loud.
Apply for law school and retract that fourth item. There you go.
I thought maybe it was the British spelling, which is,
It could be.
yeah.
Really a details person, I was really proud of finding that.
I am
So you
impressed.
kind of
I am
burst my bubble a
impressed.
little
I'm
bit.
proud
There you
for
go.
you.
Okay, well, thanks. Small
Yeah.
victories. That
Yes.
was it for me.
I can go over the ones.
Yes,
from-
what, then why
So-
not?
From the member who doesn't serve on the committee or the task force, Rule 2, Rule 16, and Rule 18.
Rule 16.
Rule 16, I believe, is about the certification of availability of funds, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yes, it is. Okay. Mr. Johnson, what about things that you think bear looking at?
So I went through all the rules, as was my direction, and I found many potential opportunities.
For improvement.
Yes, for improvement. And I have categorized them for the sake of simplicity. So I will begin with non-compliance. That's what I termed that. So I identified non-compliance with Rule 2, and there's some overlap from what I heard with some members that submitted some comments. So Rule 2 concerns the order of business. There are some things in the order of business that we are not doing, or some things that we are doing that are not in the order of business. It goes on to Rule number 9, which is the introduction of proposed ordinances and resolutions. Continue with Rule number 13, which is additional rules about the agenda. I have several concerns there. Rule number 14. Wait, excuse me.
I think it'd been
There's
easier
lots.
just to say, why don't we go one item at a time, because the way we're doing this.
Well, we got some time.
We,
do
well,
have
what
some time.
I was gonna say though is, I think we're okay with section 61 adoption. Nobody said anything about that. I'm just teasing.
Yes,
It's like,
that one's the easy one.
Um,
I can go through them line by line if you want me to.
well, what's the committee's preference? At this point, are there any other rules other than the ones that, by number, that we haven't?
Not that were identified by members, no.
No, okay, but by you?
Oh, I mean-
Just the rule number, just the rule number.
I mean, for me, the only sections that I don't have concerns about are rules number 1, 6, and 17.
Well, and there we go. So, I think, let's start with rule number 2.
So,
Because that is the order of business, and I think that came up with some other, and I mean, I do think there are things that many of us may have questions about, or why things are the way they are, and Mr. Johnson, do you want to?
Rule by rule.
sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
rule by rule.
Rule,
Anybody that has a comment.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, excuse me, let me say that clear. What I thought we'd do now is we've pretty much blown my plan of just identifying a few things. So we're gonna do what we're gonna do, which is start with the first thing we identified. And today we're gonna talk about Rule 2 and hope we get to another one. Okay.
So rule number 2, most of the concerns that I've heard and that I also have identified are in section 5, announcements and extraordinary matters adoption of agenda, particularly concerning consent. There are items listed that we should approve under consent that we are not approving by consent, and then there are items that we approve by consent that are not listed here. So I would suggest removing classes of items that determine which matters council wishes to hear on consent, and then remove those that they don't wish to approve on consent. We don't accept grants as a matter of consent. Pensions are approved by consent. The setting of the date of a public hearing we're not doing that on consent. Ordinances on second reading are not being approved on consent. And then uncontroversial rezonings are not being heard on consent.
Can we discuss, well, go ahead. Is there anything else under that rule that,
Under section 5,
no, just under Rule 2,
oh, yes.
under section,
Resolutions and memorials, section 11. The word memorials does not appear in our current agendas.
no, it does not.
And we did receive an interesting comment from a member of council who doesn't serve on the task force that may want to separate those out, may want to hear memorials earlier in the agenda, for example, so that if you're honoring someone, a family,
Yeah, they could come
they
and
could
be
come
gone.
and be
Right,
given some priority.
right.
So that was a comment we got from a member.
Can I clarify just one item?
Please.
Were you suggesting separate resolutions and memorials and then move
Into two
memorials
different
up?
things. I mean, that's
Yes,
for us to
resolutions being a
decide.
standalone.
Thank you, okay.
Yes, and memorials falling somewhere earlier in the agenda, wherever council so desired.
Okay, are 12, 13, and 14 okay, or are there issues? Well, public forum will have something to do with what comes down
Yeah, I
in
mean,
another section.
I have a few things about that.
Yep.
With public forum.
Okay, I think public forum is going to turn into a much bigger discussion
would.
overall, so what I'd like, if we could, is if y'all tell me if you're all right with this, but I think I want to get something accomplished today. So what if we looked at this Rule 2, except for the public forum piece, which is a larger conversation and is other places, are there things in the order of business that we want to discuss more fully about changing? Well, I have a question and/or concern, because as I'm going to not be chair now and just be a member of the committee. Number 7, reports of council members or committees. I think that needs clarification, because in my mind, a report of a council member or committee, so reports of council members are often activities going on in a district or in a community, but we don't have reports from the committees that we all have someone serving on. So like, I will from time to time give a report on the pension board. You know, should we get a regular standing committee report from the audit committee or from CAT? I would have assumed that's what this was in here for, but I wasn't around. So for those of you who served prior to us, vice mayor and vice mayor, how did that work in prior?
But I think you still want to let
Oh, you need to do both.
council members talk
Right.
about activities in their districts.
Right, but that's what I'm wondering. Do they become two things, like, you know, committee reports?
Yeah, in my mind, they should be two things.
Well, let me just add one thing. It would seem to me clarified if it maybe could be announcements from council members. That's what it is as much as a report, and then reports of committees. Because I do think what you're talking about is something that could be separated. And I recall way back watching some meetings, there was a time, I believe, when, let's say, one of the boards that council members serve on, whether it be CAT or whether it be pension, it's appropriate to have a report. Might even want to regularize that a little more.
I mean, my thinking is if we appoint council members to serve on bodies because council has a seat on that body, should they not be expected to give a committee report from time to time?
I think
Vice Mayor Smith.
Thank you. I think I agree with Dr. Lyons. If you separate the item, it probably will encourage more frequency of use,
Thank you, Ms. Parker.
for right or for wrong.
Well, I think it's a great idea to encourage more regular reports. And what I thought when you made the suggestion is, when I've looked at this, and one committee that I serve on is the Knoxville Community Media, and oftentimes those tend to be events or fundraisers that I
Right.
might share information about. But if we want folks to just give a monthly update, I think we got to be more clear with the language that we include, if that's what we want.
And yes, because I'm not sure that, or we create an every other, like this month, we hear
Right.
from this committee, this
Yeah.
month, we hear from that committee, that kind of thing. And so my question is, this is where it gets in the weeds. I don't know if you want that in an ordinance, or does that become a practice of each council, but it is set out that you will have committee reports. I worry a little bit about saying, this month, the audit committee has to give a report, and this month, the pension committee. board has to give a report in an ordinance. Ms. Hills?
No, I was just going to say, like, I serve on the KTA board and I report things as we have them, but a
Right.
lot of their meetings are just, there's not a lot of substance and they last 10 minutes. So
Right.
I do when needed, if you
Right.
want to make it as needed.
So, sounds to me like I'm hearing an agreement that we separate them into two different things, hoping that that will clarify what comes when. And then, but we can always revisit this before we go to the council with some suggestions, but for now, does that suffice a
I
little?
just want to add context before we keep going, that it's my hope that we set up a structure that this type of committee meets in the future again. So I just want to remind everybody that we don't have to, we can set the expectation that we
Right.
review these, but some committee, somebody reviews these in another year, for
So-
example, and can iterate.
So we could, if I'm, putting words in your mouth, it sounds a little like a suggestion that there may need to be something in this ordinance that establishes a rules committee
Absolutely.
that functions
Yeah.
ongoing as sort of a standing committee.
We want to make changes, but also to take the weight off of being perfect forever
Yes.
as well. So
Yes.
I think that's the recommendation, that there seems to be consensus that these items be separated, is a good change.
Right.
But I just generally expect this to be revisited by some other body in the future.
Okay. Anything else with order of business?
I have a few things that I didn't quite make it to. but,
Okay,
This is just really to get us more into compliance with your adopted parliamentary authority, that is Robert's Rules. By custom, you all are treating consent, or council's treating consent, where you approve them without debate and without amendment. We probably need to actually go in and actually state that. Without that, well, it just needs clarity as to what you're doing. Council is doing that by custom, but Robert's Rules would say you need to say that that's what you're going to do, that you're not going to debate them, and there's not going to be any amendments.
and is that written in the agenda?
It needs to be somewhere in the rules that,
Consent means no debate and,
yes,
okay.
that is
and
what
no
you're doing by
amendments.
practice.
Okay. Okay,
Um,
I agree with that. That's what we're doing.
It is what you're doing.
Yeah, but the council members can
Pull
withdraw
items.
one of those
Right.
items and discuss it, okay?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. I also identified the reports as we were just discussing. My only comment about public forum is not the content of it, just, I don't know that it's necessary to include the time limits within the order of business. I think that can be defined somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's somewhat burdening its readability, in my opinion, for the public, because they're going to be searching for the rules in different places.
As I say, especially since there is a rule about
Yes.
that. So are y'all okay with taking time limits out of that so that we don't have to reference this time? Okay.
That's it.
All in section, that's all for section 2, Rule 2, Order of Business?
Well, I thought
That's all I had.
we could have more discussion about number 5.
Number 5, the announcements and extraordinary matters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what would you,
See if there were any items that this committee would want to remove from the consent items. My recommendation would be that we update our rules to reflect our current practice. And so I don't have any strong opinions about what's on consent or not, but I think we should take things off that aren't our current practice.
I can review what is current practice, if that would be helpful.
well, okay, I mean, current practices, we don't accept grants.
Correct. I was going to say,
On consent.
what is council approving on consent?
Right.
So council's approving on consent certificates of compliance for alcohol establishments, community improvement funds, so
Yes.
202 funds, pensions, I feel like I'm leaving one out, but those are the ones that come to mind.
No, liquor, did you say liquor sale?
Yeah.
That's
beer board,
inclusive, yeah. Wine and grocery store, it's along the same lines.
So mostly things that come from the beer board, we approve on consent.
Either that or the pension
Or the
board,
pension board, those two,
Or
or
the
202 funds.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you would list those under A,
Correct.
so you would say consent items rather than uncontroversial matters as determined by unanimous consent. You would change that to those three things, is that the recommendation?
That's just to get us into compliance with what you're doing.
Okay, so that does need to be done. I think
Now,
it,
would it be stated limited to these items? I mean, hypothetically, somebody may want to vote, of course, you can always remove it from consent.
well, I do recall at city council work, some of our retreats, Vice Mayor Smith, we have had conversations about other things like ordinances on second reading being on consent. Then we haven't done that, but,
That was one of the items I suggested today, to
revisit.
To revisit, yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So if you put that back on consent, if someone had something they did not like, they could always pull it off of consent, but it would certainly speed things along
That's right.
in our meeting. How do people feel about that?
I would just amend that to be ordinances on second reading that received a unanimous vote on first reading.
I think that's good. I think that's good.
Well, that would at least help it speed up some.
You
I'd
wouldn't
get
want it-
some of them off the agenda.
You wouldn't want it to be just the passed, obviously, but I think passed unanimously has logic to it
Yes.
on first reading.
Councilwoman Parker, you're referring to amending 5C1? Yeah.
To say ordinances on second reading that pass by unanimous consent on first reading.
Passed.
Or
Pass unanimously, excuse me. Consent, I got consent all on the brain, sorry.
That does,
I need a Diet Coke. Sorry.
that does raise a question in my mind on voting,
Diet Coke.
which we haven't gotten to yet, but the votes are yay, nay, whatever, and everybody just indicates by voice. Have you considered putting up a chart where you punch a button to yes or no, so the audience can see how everybody has voted?
Technology.
We may be seeing some of that at this evening's meeting. Not a button yet, but we could be getting there.
Little teaser?
So here's what I'd like to, here's my first thought about that. We're done. Will's name fell off, we're done. We're done. I do think there's merit in that. I wonder, again, I've got to remember what Vice Mayor Smith said. If this committee becomes a standing committee, a rules committee that meets every year, my hesitancy was, do you want to put a certain type of technology requirement in a rule that may or may not work, but
It could be changed.
but it could be changed, but we don't have that ability right now. Ms. Parker?
Are there any items in our ordinances that require a voice vote? Or is that always the discretion of the chair?
You mean a roll call vote?
Roll call vote?
So as long as I've been in this role, there was the advice that bonds be approved or voted on as a roll
Yes.
call.
Mhm.
I think that's from bond counsel. They've requested that it be done by roll call. Nominations and elections are obviously, they're not done based on yay or nay. It's names. So like when your council's electing a new vice mayor, it's the last name of the person you're voting on. I'm not sure there are any other.
I don't know of any other, I don't think that we're requiring, I don't know of any other elected bodies around here that do roll call votes for everything.
That
Right.
might be a question for MTS.
Could be.
Or, yes, y'all could research that. I mean,
Good thing to
I will say, Ms. Parker, you gave me a flashback to COVID. When we were on
But-
Zoom and everything, and every vote we had to take was roll call because you could not hear.
I seem to remember that.
And I seem to remember a very long meeting.
But you can always ask for a roll call.
Yes, you
vote.
can always ask for a
Always
roll
ask.
call vote. So,
Well, I actually have a point about that later. It's a little unclear in the rules.
okay.
The practice is one thing, the written rule is a little more
Okay.
confusing.
Y'all, I feel like I'm hurting.
Should we hear that now as opposed to later, or?
What section
Up
is
to
it
the chair,
going?
Madam
It's
Chair.
later.
It's later.
Okay.
We were going to go in order.
Yeah, if we're going to go in order, it's hard enough to keep up with the way we're doing it right now. Let's just stick one time. I agree with you. So anything else on Rule 2, Order of Business?
Was there any consideration to the uncontroversial rezonings on first reading?
Mr. Smith, Vice Mayor Smith, did you have anything about that?
No.
Rezonings which have been approved?
Not that it hasn't been addressed subsequently.
Okay.
I had a thought.
Councilwoman Parker?
My only hesitation is the occasion when folks do not learn of it in time to show up to planning, but they learn about it before our meeting and they sign up for a public forum. But our agenda is created before we accept public forum names, so.
Couldn't we then just, if the member of council knew that they had signed up, we could ask for that to be pulled off consent?
Yeah,
And
that's
then,
possible.
I mean, wouldn't that be the easiest way to handle that?
And what's the vote for that, to pull it off of consent?
One member may
One member.
object.
It's you gotta be unanimous.
No.
No.
One
A
person.
single member may object and it will be pulled.
So we don't have to vote on it. Like if I say, I want that off consent,
Yeah.
you have to let me have it off
Oh,
consent.
yeah, put it on there then.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's.
What else can we put
you
on
just-
there?
That's been the whole time.
Excuse me, you just unleashed
we
Amelia
don't-
Parker.
Wait.
it's not
You have
like
just
we
set her
have to-
free.
It's not like we have to have a majority to amend a resolution,
Right,
amend
right.
something. One person can pull something off consent.
Yeah, okay.
So that makes our meetings a lot faster right there, if we put a lot of stuff on there. Okay, there we go.
So you want to see this preserved.
Yes, we want to preserve it now that everybody on council knows they can pull something off consent by themselves.
Yeah, because we overturn planning commission quite often these days. So that's kind of a new thing, I think, but, so we
This
just
may,
pull it off, that'd be fine.
Well,
Right.
but, yeah, go ahead.
I would say, should we put that in the rules? It's not explicit that one
Yes.
person can pull it up.
We
Might not.
probably should put that
because
in the rules
it's-
so that people would
Right.
understand one council member.
Right.
Which would also give the public the ability to contact their district rep or a sitting council at-large member and say, I'd like to comment on that. Will you pull it off consent? Okay.
It's also possible that I could be asked to report, the recorder could be asked to report, are there any people signed up to speak on these consent items? And if there are any, presumably a member of council would want to pull it.
That's a good point. So how do we make sure you do that?
I would suggest putting it in rule.
Well, where should we put it in the rule?
It's a good question.
Under consent items?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. Will you take a crack at wordsmithing that as
We
the
can.
parliamentarian?
Sure.
Thank you. Anything else on Rule 2?
Just on the, back to
Yes. Vice
previous
Mayor Smith.
comment, thank you, around voting and pressing a button, or you said tonight, will the public be able to see whatever new enhancement happens this evening at home? In terms of the
Oh.
voting? Because sometimes people at home can't tell who voted for what.
Only if the CTV or KCM is like honed in on that video screen.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think they'll be able to see it very
But
well.
I guess it's just a general challenge. Feedback I've received is that if our mics are off and it's a quick vote,
You can't
if you're
tell.
not in the room, it's hard to tell.
Sometimes if I'm sitting beside you, I can't tell.
Well, I mean, if you look at the General Assembly, when there's a vote, the camera focuses on the screen.
Okay.
We could sort of instruct
CTV
whoever's
to do
filming
it.
it to do that. I
Yeah.
think they will.
Who sits on the community media thing, I believe Ms. Parker, you can tell them
Yes.
to zoom in on the screen when we vote.
I will relay that message.
Duly noted.
It would be,
Okay.
I would imagine that would be challenging to do on every vote because we're operating a pretty
Yeah.
fast clip.
Well, they'll
but-
probably sense the ones that most people will be interested in.
Sure.
By,
I had one other thing.
yes, ma'am.
I do not have strong opinions on this, but it was brought to me, so I want to share with the committee. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on it, but I think County Commission has some order of business that has public forum at the beginning of the meeting and then also at the end. And so that was brought up to me for something for City Council to consider, whether there is a need or a want to incorporate public forum towards the beginning of the meeting.
I'm not sure how they do that. Can somebody specifically look at that?
If I'm not mistaken, County Commission allows, as you described, there's two separate sections. The first part that has the
Zone.
beginning of the meeting are two agenda items.
Okay.
And then the second public forum is like our public forum, which is open to any matter they wish to discuss. So with the exclusion of zoning, because they have a separate
Zoning meeting.
zoning meeting, County Commission does, but that's the time that members of the public can speak to agenda items, and they don't wait till they get deeper into the agenda on each individual item and hear it then.
So essentially, that would take the place of potentially what we already do on each individual agenda item. They don't allow public forum on each individual agenda item.
They just put it up at the beginning.
Right, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
And there are many jurisdictions across Tennessee that have similar formats for their public forums.
Mm-hmm.
One would assume in that regard, and I do think this would be good to look at how people do this, because it is germane, because we can always revisit how, the order of the meeting. But this is going to be something that keeps coming up about public forum. So I think the bigger question is, how do people, other elected bodies in Tennessee, do public forum?
But we can ask
And-
our folks
Yeah,
to.
yeah, that's what I was
Right.
saying, and if y'all could do some research on that for us, that would be great, because I would suspect, although I have no personal knowledge of this, but if public forum before the meeting is for a certain period of time, you don't necessarily get 3 pros, 3 cons on each agenda item, which is what we do when people come to speak. Not saying one's good or bad, but I think that would be the primary difference I imagine they have. But
I'd raise
like some-
something for that. It's actually come up a few times in my observation is sometimes the pro and con is difficult for people. I mean, I would specifying it that way. And people will sometimes say, well, I'm kind of in favor of part of it, or I'm just speaking on it. And then again, sometimes people who say they're speaking for it are actually speaking against. I mean, all those sorts of things come up, but rather than just speaking to the item.
Yeah.
But, which again, having known that other jurisdictions do on this might be
Yeah, that would
helpful.
would that be helpful to this committee to have people look at that? Let's look at that. Okay. How are we coming on time? Okay, all right, so, are we finished with Rule 2, except we're gonna we are gonna separate resolutions and memorials, and we may add memorials to the beginning of the order. So would you do it, after the approval of minutes? Would you do it before announcements? No, and the adoption of the agenda? Or would you do it just announcements, adopt the agenda, and it becomes item A, memorials, and if there are any, and then go to consent? Anybody got a particular strong feeling? Okay, then I move that we make it under 5. We approve, and it becomes adoption of the agenda, and first thing is memorials, and then you get into consent agenda. Is that, everybody, we're not voting on the screen, but we're head nodding, and I'm going to take that as a okay.
Yes.
All right. Then, can we put section, what about this? Oh, wait, we've turned the page. Proposed ordinances on second reading. Vice Mayor Smith, was that you that said something about that?
Yeah, I think we covered it in another section,
Okay,
which is around planning, rezoning things that were unanimous, putting them
Okay.
on consent. Yeah.
okay, all right. Okay, want to make sure that, and then,
Which just modernizing Section 10, Metropolitan Planning Commission. It still
yes, we need
appears
to- yeah,
that
we
way
need to change,
many times in the code, but slowly but surely we can fix
Well,
that.
I assume we can make a blanket recommendation that in our rules, the name of the Metropolitan Planning Commission be changed to reflect its current name. So, all right, anything else on Rule 2? Or can we declare that done? Not that we can't revisit this in the next few months, but for today. Okay. Rule number 3, Vice Mayor. Somebody said they wanted to talk about that.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Parker?
I have your comments if you,
So, I was trying to find, and I get a lot of questions about workshops, and that's under the vice mayor's responsibilities. And I thought the rules could flesh out how workshops are, how city council workshops are scheduled. And my other recommendation was that we find a way, going back to the technology comment, but to incorporate at least some sort of guidance around how city council members should deliberate on issues that such as like planning a new workshop. And we have a city council forum, but I don't know if putting that specific technology in our rules makes sense, or saying some sort of open forum. But that was my recommendation around Rule 3, was just trying to capture some of the responsibilities of the vice mayor's office when it came to scheduling workshops and city council retreats, meetings.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
So are you saying that it should be directed by the public as opposed to the council?
No.
Okay.
What should be directed?
The workshops and the,
No. No, I think that it should be clear to the public, just like the rules lay out how city council meetings and agendas are developed and come together. This is a space for the public to have a better understanding of how our workshops are scheduled. I mean, we have the 2 Thursdays a month that we're supposed to hold, and that's another, I don't know if that's in the rules. I don't think that's in the rules.
It kind of is, but we'll get to it.
Oh,
Well, so
but that's a practice that we don't really follow necessarily, but I thought, and maybe the workshops are mentioned somewhere in the rules and I missed it.
are the workshops. So can we say then leave how we elect the vice mayor and the fact that the vice mayor oversees the administrative activities of the council alone, and talk about how workshops are handled further in the rules where workshops already are mentioned?
Yeah, what section is that?
Rule number 13 mentions workshops, but it's really referring to an archaic practice that council's not used in decades.
Mm-hmm.
It's more akin to what the planning commission does for their agenda review or county commission's work session.
Which is what I was used to on the Board of Education.
Yes.
Workshops were basically the meeting before the meeting where you went over the agenda and you asked items and, you got your questions answered, and then the voting meeting went it was easier because you understood stuff, but we seem to use workshops for special interest, things that we're interested in learning about.
Seems to me, just workshops are fundamental part of what council does now. They often occur, and might be worth having a section on workshops to get at what Councilwoman Parker was speaking about, and others, how are they called? I mean, I know traditionally it comes up that the council will take a vote to allow a public forum at a workshop, because apparently it's not provided for otherwise, and those things could be made explicit, that the workshop includes a public forum and that sort of thing, for when they're scheduled.
So, okay,
Because workshops are referenced as if they've been defined, but I
They
don't think they have.
so it sounds to me like there is some thought that we need to create another section to define what a workshop is and what a workshop does. I would think it would be helpful if we had some other examples of how other people use workshops that aren't tied to just prepping for the meeting, because that's what a lot of the other elected bodies in Knox County do.
Right. In reality, the practice of workshops, that is for council, however it's defined, whether by the will of council through the vice mayor or suggested, which is one thing I think you were speaking about, it's a little unclear, as to here's an item you need to get much more in-depth on and get background on, rather than just to talk about the agenda or something.
Right.
It's around a particular substantive
I mean, we
interest.
had workshops on the concept of middle housing. We've had workshops on co-responder and alternative response,
Right, yeah.
things like that, so. So can we so what I hear is that we may want to consider creating another section or rule about workshops themselves. And I personally, if y'all agree, I would like we have 2 people willing to do some work. One could work on figuring out how other people do workshops. And I don't think, Tennessee, we don't want to do anything that violates Tennessee law, but we're not the only state that governs, so there may be
Right.
other examples.
Well, I think we could have
What if we
two
could get
things
by
we
with
could, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I said we would if we could get by with it. I was talking about breaking Tennessee state law.
That,
Turn your mic off.
I know. No, I'd say something else. I was going to say something else, but go ahead, Dr. Lyons.
no, I would say it'd be nice to know how other legislative bodies handle something that we call workshops. Maybe they might call it something else. And B, given the sense of the discussion today, maybe I'll be glad with our folks, maybe put together what a draft of what that section might look like. Workshops, and workshops are called
that
by
would
the
be
vice
very-
mayor
that
in
would be very good.
consultation with council members or whatever that
Oh,
is.
yes.
And then we can flesh that out
Yeah,
later.
That would
because-
be good if you could,
Right.
It would be nice if in the workshops, it was a little more evident where the decision was going to be made at the next council meeting or whenever it was going to be considered. That was one of the constrictions that I recall. We couldn't make a decision at the workshop.
You mean you were not allowed to?
Not allowed to.
no, because it
not a
hasn't been
vote.
shown as a
Right.
voting meeting.
So I would like there to be some evidence of kind of where this decision is going.
Well, and I think to that point, I'm sorry, Ms. Helsley.
Well, you could finish your thought.
Okay.
Is this the only place this appears, as when it talks about the old workshops they used to have before every meeting?
No, it's not.
In
Okay.
No.
14, it's.
That's why we said we may need a whole new section.
Okay. Because this is like, we don't do that. We don't play that way.
Well, which is why I think we're having this discussion, because over time, maybe what was intended and what it has become is unclear. We need some clarification. The only thing I was going to say about the workshop itself is because a lot of these times, these workshops are just informational. Sometimes it's not even about anything that we're going to be voting on anytime soon. It may be something that the mental health workshop. That wasn't anything that we were going to vote on. It was just to let us be knowledgeable about the crisis in our community. So you may find, I'm suspecting we may find that places have different kinds of workshops, or they call them different things. So, okay, so you're going to research and maybe give us some sort of draft,
Right.
something.
And I don't know how specific, I mean, some things have happened at the workshops that I always find a little intriguing, like casting straw votes. I've been in one, and that, I know might be worth some discussion of whether it's a good or bad idea, and
Yeah.
so, or whether that's included, but.
But that kind of gets to the frustration that often occurs after the workshop, both by council members and by the audience. So
Okay, so what do you say?
You could specify, could you not, Lynn, whether you were actually having a workshop for something that was going to be on the next agenda,
Right.
or if it was just informational, like
Right.
trying to get money for a new mental health hospital.
Yes.
Which, that was
Yeah.
just like, let's all get together and see if we could cry a lot and they'll give us money, right? So, right.
Yeah,
So,
well,
I guess we could make that different.
yeah, I think we'd have to explain better what we're going to do in the workshop. Next, so from Rule 3, we got that we're going to have a whole nother rule, is kind of what I gathered. Or we're going to take parts of other rules where workshop is mentioned and maybe flesh that out better. So, sorry, just trying to add a little levity here to, so the next thing is Rule 5, the Audit Committee. That, I've checked that. I'm not sure who mentioned that.
I did because, and I'll get to this. Rule number 20, I'm skipping way ahead, but it speaks to a lot of
Yes,
the
you are.
issues I have. So I'll just read rule number 20, just for the sake of understanding. No standing rule of order shall be amended or repealed except by affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members of the council. In consideration of any particular matter, any vote not requiring the approval of a greater majority may be suspended by 2/3 consent of the membership. And it's this issue of suspension. This is about suspending your rules. And a lot of the rules that are contained in this article are really not by their nature able to be suspended because they have application outside of the meeting. And the first one that appears is this audit committee. Council really can't, in a meeting like the one we're going to have in 2 hours, less than 2 hours, council can't vote at that meeting to suspend the audit committee. It's just not practical. So my suggestion would be throughout this document is to create a separate article where different rules would live that can't be suspended. But the rules that would remain, these could be suspended at the will of council.
So we would have untouchable rules.
Well, they're not untouchable.
I'm just teasing
Yeah.
you, Will. But, the things that legally cannot be suspended.
Not in my opinion. Council could, of course, always, propose an ordinance to amend the audit committee, and
Right.
as it says, done. But you can't do it in the middle of a meeting. We're going to suspend the audit committee. We're going to suspend the ability of the vice mayor to do certain things. That's beyond the scope of a meeting.
Okay.
And unfortunately, there are dozens of rules that really fall into that camp.
Is it, just to clarify, I don't have any objection to this, but the items that are allowable to be suspended in reality are procedures in the meeting itself, not rules or policy-oriented rules or bodies or committees, right? It's really the procedures that are allowed to be suspended.
Correct. Good examples would be your rules about public forum.
Right.
We're going to allow more speakers than the rules allow.
Yeah.
Yes.
So is there a way that we can,
Well, unfortunately, unless you're going to find a way to rewrite Rule 20 that makes it seem like you can suspend anything in this article, I would suggest separating them out,
okay.
which,
Well, I guess what I was trying to get to is if it's just procedures that are allowed to be suspended, could we make change a sentence in 20 that says that describes the things that can be, as opposed to carving off an entire section and listing out things?
it's possible. I'm also hoping that by changing Rule 20, it would be more clear to a layperson that you wouldn't think that any of these could be suspended.
Okay.
But
I don't have any objection to that.
Well, who wants to take a stab at drafting that, since you're the only one that seems to know exactly what you're talking about? Would you like to take a first stab at pulling some of that out?
I can take a first stab at it.
Yeah, I mean-
This will be a challenge.
Right, but, a first stab, we may have to get city council attorney or
Sure.
something to help us after the fact, but I would like to give more direction to an attorney
Sure.
before we ask somebody to write something.
Rule 5 will be easy. It's just removing that entire rule from this article.
Okay, so is the first thing, so in Rule 5, what are you saying we do?
Oh, I would just suggest either creating a new article entitled Standing Rules, or perhaps committees, or something of that nature. And it just striking it out of this article and inserting it in a different article, a new article that you would create.
So, I'm sorry, Will, are you talking about Section A?
No, I'm sorry, the entire rule about the audit committee, the entire structure of the audit committee, removing it from this section of the code.
Right, it really doesn't fit here.
No, it doesn't.
That's
No,
the point. I
no.
mean, it's defining a committee, which is a real outlier from rules, which are mostly rules of procedure.
Yes.
Okay. Does that make sense to everybody else? Well, I think that's the point.
I think it
Ms.
was-
Parker, did you have something to say about that?
Well, should we also add the vice mayor to that?
Oh, I didn't mention it there, but yeah, the whole section on the vice mayor probably should not be included here because
Yeah.
you can't suspend that section, really.
We can't suspend the vice mayor?
No, you can't really.
Moving right along.
Well, look, I didn't say I wanted to suspend one. We have, take that up with your South Knoxville contingent down there. But, let's see, so Rule 5, you're thinking about taking Rule 5 out and putting it somewhere else. Rule 5 about the audit committee.
Yes, and I would also suggest the same for rule number
Rule
3. Yes.
So Rule 3 and Rule 5 should be taken out of this part and discussed somewhere else. Okay.
That would be my suggestion.
Well, I think everybody agreed with that, correct? Okay, so. Yes, yeah, well, it's just gonna show up toward the back. Ms. Helsley. So, Rule 9 is the next rule. And then I'd like to see if we can get through Rule 9 and maybe adjourn after Rule 9, since we have beer board at 5,
Yep.
and give us a minute.
Just, if I may, Chair.
Yes.
Want to leave a couple minutes each meeting probably for, Ms. Deere and Mr. Morgan, if you all have any clarifying questions, I think, given that they're going to take the handoff for some of this, just, is that okay? Just-
Yeah,
You're
but,
welcome to ask any questions at the end if you need clarification.
yeah, we will.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but, so, Rule number 9, and then we'll go to clarifying questions if y'all have any.
I had one,
You have one with Rule 9.
not Rule 9, actually. I didn't mention it because we got sidetracked
Imagine
very
that.
quickly with my, Rule 7 and Rule 8, I have the same concerns. They need to be separated out. Those are not really things that you can suspend.
Okay. Everybody all right with that? Okay. I'm gonna talk about Rule 9 before we leave. What, who? I can't-
Introduction of proposed ordinances.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do you remember, was that you, or was that, did another council member?
I think
share?
I had a comment, yeah. So Rule 9 states that the agenda shall also reflect the councilmanic district particularly affected by any proposed matter, if any. That's not really being done, I don't think, or at least it's not listed on the agenda consistently. So,
So it is with like zonings, and it is on beer board stuff, which is a different thing, but I'm just saying, it always says what district the property's in for beer board and for zoning.
like for resolutions that maybe involved a sidewalk, it doesn't list the
Well, you know-
district.
I will say, I wish it did.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think we should be doing that.
So this would be an example of something that is not being done, that the committee and council may want to be done,
Well,
so.
so I would say if it says we're supposed to do it, and then how do we, I don't know that we need to go back to the entire city council to say, we want to do this, just who do we tell to do this?
I think there does need to be a separate list of things that are in our rules that we're not doing that we should be.
Yes.
At a minimum, as a memo produced from this committee for council to
To know,
be retrained.
yes, be retrained, yeah.
Well, I mean, this would also be for the administration,
Excuse
because
me,
they're producing the
And
agenda.
the public is
Yes.
awareness as well. So
Okay,
I think we need to capture that list separately
Yes.
from this.
that's good. I was just going to say, start doing it, but yes, that's a better plan to just
Mr. Johnson, are
keep a
you?
list. Yeah, he'll be
Yes.
the
Okay,
list keeper.
thank you.
Thanks. Yes, it does.
I have a question for
Well,
Will.
Okay.
Where does it
Ms.
say,
Helsley.
is it in here in Rule 9 or somewhere else where it says that if a council member introduces an ordinance or whatever, that it will be first on the agenda behind and take up all this time for people who are waiting for zoning issues?
I know what you're referring to, that's article, or Rule 18, order of
Okay.
debate. That's about who gets preference in debate.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Not about where it comes on the agenda.
No. Also with Rule 9, I would suggest it be pulled from this article. It is, those elements cannot really be suspended.
Well, we're whittling, ain't we? Okay.
Yeah, Rule 9. We got lots of lists going.
Councilwoman Helsley, did you want to address the?
Yeah.
Where it appeared, because it wasn't here, and I didn't know where that was.
And you're referring to if a council member proposes a resolution that it goes to the top.
It's at the top, no matter if it's going to take the next 5 hours to do it, yes.
Yeah.
And then it leaves people that have a zoning issue on the only thing they're ever going to buy to wait till 11 o'clock to talk about it. And I don't think that's fair.
So
I mean,
we
we're
did
going to be here either way.
We did receive a suggestion from a member who's not on the task force that that ordinances on first reading that section be moved to before resolutions. That it be heard earlier in the agenda.
Because
For that
those-
very reason, for applicants for rezonings are having to sit through.
Well, either way you do it, right, okay, either move them up or move, because I've seen them and it was hours, and it's just not fair to somebody that just is trying to
Okay.
get a lot
Which
rezoned.
which may get at maybe why county commission has its own zoning meeting. Does that separately before the actual council meeting, commission meeting, correct?
I believe they start their regular meeting, and then when the appointed hour begins, or arrives, they adjourn the regular meeting, go to their zoning meeting, and then resume the regular meeting when they've finished the zoning hearing.
So that people who have items to come before them know when it will start. Okay,
Yes.
interesting. I have a third thing I'd like y'all to look at is how ordinance, this kind of thing happens with other bodies. I mean, we can do whatever we want to do, but is anybody else curious how other people do it?
In terms of the order,
Yes.
yeah,
With the ordinances about
I was
land
just
use.
going to ask two of the former vice
Vice
mayors. Currently it's first reading, which is usually a land use thing, or some other structural ordinance change, then it's resolutions, and then it's, second readings, then resolutions, then first readings. How was that experience? Or what do you remember from that?
Or did you block it out?
Maybe that.
Doesn't matter, or?
Fabulous.
I don't know that it really, I don't remember that being a real issue, to be honest with you. I mean,
Yeah, I agree with Nick.
I just don't.
That wasn't something that ever kind of got foggy with me.
I'm curious to see if there were as many changes previously as there are in today's current land use situation. We seem to be seeing a lot more planning, a lot more activity that might involve rezonings, but, okay.
Madam Chair, if I could, I'd just like to go back just for a second. I know we've moved on.
Yes.
But with the, the districts being able to read certain things at a certain time, particularly with land use issues, it's always going to be, for the most part, in certain districts. And I just don't know that that's fair to everybody else to just take that time all the time for that particular district or districts.
Oh, so are you saying, okay,
I mean, like, we all know, we all know what the districts, where all the growth is. And so it just seems like it's a little uncomfortable to me to think that
we'll be
certain, it's just always,
going to be the first thing on the agenda?
that's right.
Okay.
And I just want to throw that out.
Okay.
I'm sorry to
No,
digress,
that's fine.
but
That's fine.
I just had one
Yes,
small thing to
Counselor.
add, probably for further discussion later on, because it ties into the Rule 16 that we were talking about, but it seemed to me with the Rule 9, we have the fiscal note that's attached to our agenda, but it's not included in Rule 9. Is that what Rule 16 is fulfilling? That certification of funds, is that fiscal note on our EIS?
I'm not clear that Rule 16 is really, that's being provided.
Right?
Yeah. On the agenda information sheet.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm not clear that that's being provided, at least not consistently.
Well, that was the only thing I was going to add to Rule 9 was that the information that we want to see. And one thing that I had brought up was that I feel like previously on that information sheet, we were seeing the opinions of Planning Commission and staff, how they had voted, and then it switched to just the commission vote. And I wanted to get the staff vote back, so I don't have to dig for it.
That's another item that I have.
And what rule was that?
13C.
Okay, can,
Let's try to get to 9.
well, yeah, but basically what I heard about 9 is that Will thinks that needs to come off, and we talk about that as a separate thing, because it's not, we can't change that?
That's all true, and also that if you want the council district listed on relevant items,
And it says that it's supposed to be being done, so that's the list that you're making of
Yes.
things that say that should be done, but are not being done, that we can share as a memo to city council and the administration. Because what I hear this task force saying is they think it should be done.
yes.
Nobody's saying that we should not do it, put the district on the ordinances. So, just note that.
Yes.
Then I declare Rule 9 done. So we don't have anything on 10, 11, or 12?
10, 11, and 12, same deal. I would suggest moving them to a different article.
So you're going to have a list that's an article of things that cannot be suspended,
Yes.
so that you are hereby anointed to go find all of those between now and the March meeting and provide us that list when you compile it. And that will also be as part of the agenda packet for the next meeting, so everybody in the community can see that. And then the other thing that you will be working on as we go throughout this process is a memo to city council about items that are in the rules that over time are not being practiced, and especially if we think it, my thought would be if we think it should continue, then that will stay on there. If we think it should change, we will probably amend it, and it will come back as a recommendation of a change to the rules.
Yes.
Is that fair to say? Okay. Then I think now is a good time to end. I feel really good. We made it through 12 by moving a bunch of them off, off to another list. But we've at least talked about 12, which is good progress in our first meeting. And now we will ask if the work that we have asked the Baker Center to do, Dr. Lyons, will you tell us what you think it is that we've asked you to do, and then we can ask your colleagues if they have questions.
Well, I think the main thing was
On your mic.
I'm sorry. The workshop, prepare a comparison of what the other communities do in state, and I don't think we have to be restricted to the state, but maybe get a sense of best practices or common actions on workshops, and also maybe prepare a draft of a section which would describe what a workshop was and how it would be called and so forth. So both the council and the public would have the awareness of that, and whether it included public forum, et cetera, which I think it should. And then we were, I will call on my
Then
colleague.
public forum.
And public forum, how that's handled, there's how many, in other communities, at the beginning, at the end of the meeting, everything about public forum, the time, total time, time for speakers, et cetera, just to get the lay of the land on that.
Right.
Those are the two major items.
Do y'all have any questions about that? Does that seem?
And we'll meet together and.
Yeah, if you got half of what we discussed, I'd be impressed.
Yeah.
Impressed.
Um,
nonetheless.
We really appreciate y'all being willing to do this work, and thanks to the Baker Center for letting you guys do that, because it will be a great help to us to have that to look at. Any other comments? Anything else that needs to come before the body, Vice Mayor? All right, then I will adjourn us until our next meeting, which is March the 18th.
Yes. Same time, same place.
Just a question on that. Do we want to continue the progression as we were? And
Yes.
allow them to keep, okay, that sounds good.
Yes, so what I would like is, first thing, we hear a report back from y'all of what you found about the questions we had. Would you want that as a report at the beginning of our meeting? And then we can go in, we will start at Rule 13 at our next meeting, correct?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, we are adjourned.